He's just a broken vet, sweet but safe. That's what she said when she thought I wasn't listening just loud enough to her sister for the words to crawl under the door and set fire to the pieces of me I'd buried. I stood there. In the hallway, holding the laundry basket, frozen, safe. That word hit harder than any shrapnel I ever took overseas. Because safe didn't mean dependable, it meant harmless. It meant small. It meant forgettable. And suddenly I realized. Emma hadn't married me out of love. She'd married what she thought was left of me. The quiet, the limp. The hollow shell of someone who'd seen too much and talked too little. I wasn't always this way. I wasn't born broken. I had been forged under fire, under secrets, under commands barked in sandstorms with bullets chewing up the sky. But the man she married, the one who woke up screaming but said he just had bad dreams, the one who never took his shirt off in daylight because of the tattoo on his shoulder, he wasn't sweet. He was silent, because if I ever spoke, she wouldn't stay. That tattoo she never asked about, the one I kept hidden like a wound that wouldn't close, it wasn't art. It wasn't rebellion. It was the mark of the Phoenix unit, Tier 1 Black Ops. No formal records, no names, just coordinates and ghosts. We were the men they sent in when negotiations failed and deniability mattered. And when I left that world behind, I left behind. More than uniform and rank, I left behind brothers, blood, and the part of myself that could never sit calmly at a dinner table and laugh at jokes about people playing soldier. Emma met me at the VA hospital where she volunteered, back when I still wore a brace and flinched when someone walked up behind me too fast. She saw the damage, saw the stiffness, saw the way I folded in on myself in public, and she thought, here's someone I can build a life around. He won't run, he won't chase glory, he just wants peace. And for a while I tried, I really did. I built birdhouses, took up quiet shifts at the hardware store, learned how to make chili and use a washing machine. But silence isn't healing, it's just hiding. And the more I stayed quiet, the more Emma grew comfortable filling in my story for me. Mike served in the military, she'd say at parties. He had a tough time, but he's doing better now. She didn't know about the file under the floorboard, or the second phone I kept locked in the toolbox. She didn't know about the men I visited once a year, all wearing the same haunted eyes and faded ink under long sleeves. She never asked. And maybe that's what hurt most, not that she didn't know, but that she didn't care to. I overheard that conversation a week before our anniversary. She and her sister had been drinking wine, laughing in the kitchen while I folded towels in the hallway. I mean, come on, her sister had said, you married a guy who limps, barely talks, and freaks out during thunderstorms. Emma giggled, actually giggled, and said, he's just a broken vet, sweet but safe. He's not going anywhere. She was right. I wasn't going anywhere. Not because I was afraid, but because I owed her something, for staying, for seeing. A broken man and choosing to live in the ruins with him. But I wasn't sweet. I wasn't safe, and I sure as hell wasn't finished. That night, I sat in the shed after she went to bed and opened the box under the floorboard. The metal latch creaked like a memory coming undone. Inside was everything I'd kept from her: photos of men with redacted names, a thumb drive, an encrypted flash phone, and the folded patch of my last mission uniform. The tattoo she never noticed? That mark meant I was part of something no one could speak about publicly. The kind of missions that ended with silence or sacrifice, where medals didn't matter and bodies were buried with false names. My last. My final descent into fire had ended with half my unit gone, and the man responsible walking free behind diplomatic immunity. I never told her, never told anyone, that tattoo. It wasn't ink. It was a death certificate I kept wearing. I stared at it in the mirror that night, standing shirtless under the shed's cold light. For the first time in years, I didn't look away. I didn't look broken. I looked angry, the kind of anger that had purpose. That night, I started writing. Not a goodbye, a record, a truth. I didn't know who it was for her, myself, or the ghosts I still carried like weight on my shoulders. I wrote about the men I'd lost, the mission that never officially existed, the pain I had learned to fold into my spine until I walked like it had always been there. I wrote about how I watched her fall in love with the idea of a man who couldn't challenge her, and how I let her believe it because it was easier than dragging her into my nightmares. I wrote until dawn, and when I finally walked back inside, shirt clutched in one hand, I caught her sleeping on the couch, soft music playing, a wedding photo open on her lap. I was smiling in it back when I still knew how to fake it back. When she still looked at me like I was a mystery she wanted to solve. But the truth was, she never solved me. She settled for the version that wouldn't explode, the version that wouldn't speak, the safe one. And I realized in that moment, I wasn't done being dangerous. The night of Emma's dinner party felt like stepping into a life I didn't belong in, a world of smooth smiles, polished wine glasses, soft lighting, and people who talked about career moves and weekend getaways like nothing heavier had ever touched their lives. I stood in the corner of our living room, wearing a clean button-down shirt she picked out for me, holding a glass of red I hadn't tasted, smiling like a man who knew his place. Emma floated between guests like a hostess out of a magazine spread, laughing a little louder than usual, tossing compliments like confetti, brushing past me with the kind of brief touch that said, just keep quiet, be polite. She didn't introduce me as a Marine, didn't say anything about the missions or medals, just, this is Mike, my husband. He used to be military, used to be. As if I'd returned my soul like an old library book. Like it was something I'd borrowed and no longer needed. That word use sank into me like a stone in water. I nodded when someone asked about my job. Hardware store, I said. No one asked more. But then one of her friends, the sharp-looking blonde in a navy pantsuit Lena, I think tilted her head and asked if I'd ever seen combat. Before I could answer, Emma cut in with a quick little laugh, the kind meant to lighten the mood before it ever got heavy. Oh, Mike doesn't talk about that, she said, waving her hand like she was brushing off dust. He's seen some stuff, but mostly he builds furniture now. He's amazing with wood. The table chuckled. Even I laughed, but inside, something shifted, something brittle. I looked around that table of white-collar comfort and felt like a ghost in my own home. Then I saw Lena again looking, not laughing. Her eyes weren't like the others. They weren't dismissive or amused. They were scanning, analyzing, and they landed squarely on my forearm, where the sleeve of my shirt had pulled up just an inch too far, just enough to see the edge of the tattoo I never let anyone see, the mark of the Phoenix unit, black ink on pale scar tissue. No names, no dates, just the symbol, the one no civilian should recognize. And yet she narrowed her eyes and tilted her wine glass slowly, like the way you'd tip your head at a stranger you almost recognize from a nightmare. Hours later, after the food had been cleared and people had started to thin out, I slipped into the kitchen to rinse dishes while Emma giggled in the living room with her guests. That's when Lena followed. She didn't speak right away, just leaned against the counter and watched me. Then, quiet but sharp, she said, Phoenix unit? My hands froze in the sink. I turned slowly. She wasn't smiling. Tier 1, she added, her voice lower. That's what the mark means, right? I stared at her, weighing 1,000 lies in a second. But then she smirked, not cruel, just knowing, and said, don't worry, I'm not asking questions. I used to work agency, Northern Africa, ghost ops. I know the ink. Only reason I'm not freaking out is because I know what it costs to wear that. I exhaled too slowly. She knew, and I couldn't tell if that terrified me or gave me back a piece of myself I thought I'd lost. We didn't talk much after that. She nodded once, respectful, muted, and left the kitchen like nothing happened. But I stayed there, hands shaking in the sink, water running too hot now, staring at the tiny ripple her words caused. Because Lena had seen me, not the broken vet version Emma curated. Not the safe, quiet husband who watered plants and limped upstairs. She saw the man who buried friends in silence. The man who was ordered to disappear into civilian life because he knew too much, had done too much. And as I stared into the faucet's reflection, I realized Emma never asked. Never once in all our nights together, all our anniversaries and birthdays, never once did she ask what that tattoo meant. She never touched it, never even pretended to be curious. She accepted the scars but rejected the story, because it was easier to build a life around someone who couldn't challenge the image she sold to the world. Sweet but safe. That's what she told people. That's how she coped with marrying a man whose silence made her the hero. I finished the dishes, wiped my hands, and walked into the living room just as the last guests were leaving. Emma gave me a quick smile, distracted. You were great tonight, she said. Thanks for being mellow. I went upstairs before I said something I'd regret. I sat on the edge of the bed and unbuttoned my shirt slowly, staring at the mirror on our dresser. The tattoo caught the light, faded, sharp-edged, still defiant. I traced it with my thumb, remembering the first time I earned it, remembering the desert, the fire, the mission that cost us 6 men. The voice on comms that called me 9 instead of Mike. The silence I chose afterward to protect what was left of them. And now Lena's voice echoed louder than Emma's laughter. She had said, I know what it costs to wear that, Emma. Never asked. She never paid the cost, and I began to wonder if she ever truly cared who I was before I became the man she felt safe around. The next morning, with Emma off to work and the house finally silent again, I stood alone in the shed, staring at the warped wooden floor beneath the workbench like it was a grave marker I'd visited too many times. I didn't need to check. If the box was still there, I knew it was, just like I knew every item inside by weight, texture, and smell. It had been nearly 5 years since I first buried it there, tucked away from the world Emma thought she understood. The wood groaned softly as I lifted the panel, my hands moving on muscle memory, my breath slow and steady like I was disarming a mine, and in a way I was. There it was, the metal box with a rusted latch and scratches from every time I'd debated opening it but changed my mind. I pulled it out, dust motes dancing in the sunlight filtering through the cracked shed window, and sat on the cold concrete floor. My heart wasn't racing, but something deeper was stirring, like a lion stretching after years in a cage. I unlatched the box, and the air inside smelled faintly of oil, old paper, and dried-out leather. Inside were things Emma had never seen, never asked about, never even sensed beneath all her soft reassurances and polite silence. The top layer held photos, black and white stills from night vision drone captures, a few team shots with faces blacked out, and one of me, younger, harder, standing beside men who never came home. Below that were medals still in their velvet cases, untouched, meaningless without the context behind them. And then the mission files pages torn, redacted with thick black ink, names crossed out by someone who never intended the full story to be known. I knew those pages by heart. I didn't need to read them again to feel their weight, but still. I did. I let my eyes pass over the report from Operation Winter Path, the one that ended in a canyon in Kandahar and cost us 6 men brothers who died because the man giving orders was feeding intel to the other side. His name was never revealed, not publicly, not even in the after-action review, but I knew who he was. I had it all on the flash drive I kept taped under the lid of the box, the drive I'd taken out that night after the mission, before we were extracted. Footage, audio, everything. I could have brought down the entire chain of command. Instead, I chose silence. Not because I was afraid, but because if I'd spoken then, it would have meant exposing the surviving half of my unit to retaliation, scrutiny, and a public that only pretended to care. So I vanished into a discharge, a limp, and a quiet life. In a town that didn't ask questions, I closed the box and carried it into the house. The weight felt heavier now, not physically, but morally, spiritually, like I was about to drag the truth into a place that had only ever wanted peace and distance. I placed it on the kitchen table, centered it like a meal waiting to be served. I opened the lid and left it there, raw and unfiltered, for her to see when she got home. No note, no dramatic speech, just the truth, sitting in plain sight for the first time. I spent the rest of the day in the backyard, fixing the fence, chopping wood, doing the kinds of quiet chores I'd adopted to stay invisible. I kept glancing through the kitchen window, waiting for the moment when she'd come home and find it, when the past I'd hidden would collide with the version of me she'd built around her needs. She came home around 6, keys jingling, heels clacking across the hardwood. I heard the fridge open, the hum of the microwave, her voice calling out, "Did you remember to pick up eggs?" I didn't respond. I just watched. She walked past the table once, didn't even slow down, came back with a glass of wine, her phone in the other hand. She saw the box, looked at it for maybe half a second, then pushed it aside like clutter, sat down and started scrolling. No questions, no pause, no curiosity. I stood in the doorway, silent, still wearing the same shirt I'd had on when I dug up the truth, and realized that Emma didn't want to know who I'd been. Not really. She had spent our entire marriage avoiding that question, not out of fear, but because the mystery was safer than the answer. Because if she knew, she'd have to reconcile the man she married with the one who once stood in burning villages and called in strikes with a pulse of ice in his veins. If she asked about the tattoo, she'd learn it wasn't just a symbol, it was a name written in fire and classified ink. If she asked about the limp, she'd hear the scream of a friend who pulled me out of a blast radius and lost his own legs in the process. But she didn't ask. She never had. She just assumed the silence meant safety, that the absence of stories meant I had none to tell. I walked back to the shed after she went to bed, closed the box, put it away, and for the first time I wasn't protecting her. I was deciding. If someone doesn't want your truth, how long before they stop deserving your silence? Something had shifted, something irreversible. And I knew then my past wasn't the part that would destroy us. Her comfort with not knowing was. 3 days after I left the file on the table, after she ignored it like she always had, after another dinner of quiet clinks and lukewarm smiles where she didn't ask a single question about the open box sitting 2 feet away, they came unannounced. Uninvited and inevitable, just like everything from that life I had tried to bury. I was chopping wood behind the shed, splitting logs in the sharp cold, when I saw them 2 black SUVs rolling up the gravel driveway like shadows with engines, clean, silent, polished down to the reflection on their door handles. Emma peeked through the blinds and muttered something about insurance agents or Veterans Affairs, maybe recruiters for a VA benefit drive. But I knew better. I didn't have to see their badges to know. Their walk gave them away, controlled, efficient, and completely detached from the suburban scenery they were slicing through. 2 men stepped out, dressed in gray suits with no logos, no military crests, no overt authority, just the kind of precise presence that made regular people nervous without knowing why. I wiped my hands on my jeans and met them halfway down the driveway. The taller one nodded. "Sir, we've got a situation," he said flatly, like he was reciting a weather report. "Langley wants you back." I stared at him, dead in the eye, and replied, "I'm retired." He didn't blink. "You're not retired. You're on standby." That's when I saw the envelope. Thick, cream-colored, sealed with a red wax stamp I hadn't seen since my last sanction briefing. He handed it to me. My name was printed. On it in bold black type, no last name, just my call sign, Phoenix 9. The second I saw it, my chest tightened like an old muscle remembering pain. I didn't need to open it to know what it meant. Somewhere in the world, something had gone sideways, and someone somewhere still thought I was useful. I stood there, silent, while Emma stepped onto the porch behind me, confused and wide-eyed, wearing her soft robe and morning comfort like armor. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice thin, almost irritated. "Is this about your pension?" I turned to face her, really face her, and when I spoke, I didn't soften my voice. I didn't translate. I just told her what she never wanted to hear. "The man you married was never broken. He was just quiet, because he's done things you can't laugh off over wine." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at the envelope in my hand, the words, the symbols, the silence they represented. She looked at the SUVs. The men, me. And for the first time, I saw her try to reconcile the version of me she curated with the version standing in front of her, now calloused, unreadable, fully present. She whispered, "What is this?" But the truth is, there was no way to explain without breaking the entire structure we'd built together. Because it was built on omission, on me keeping the worst of myself locked away so she could feel safe. And now that it was here, knocking in plain daylight, she realized she never knew me at all. That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't write a note. I didn't owe that version of us a ceremony. I packed a bag I hadn't touched in 5 years, one that still had sand in its seams, and a satellite phone wrapped in a thermal pouch, the box from the floorboard. Went back into the duffel. My boots came out of storage. I laid my old sidearm on the table, not to scare her, but because I needed her to see it, to know this wasn't a cost to my doubt grown. This was who I'd always been. She came downstairs just before dawn, standing at the edge of the living room like she wanted to say something, but the words died on her lips before they reached me. Maybe she realized then that she had lived next to a man with a storm inside him and mistook the silence for calm. She finally asked, "Where are you going?" I looked at her, eyes steady, voice low, "Where I'm needed." She flinched like I'd slapped her. Maybe because for once I wasn't asking permission. I zipped the bag and hoisted it over my shoulder. The door closed behind me without drama. Outside, the SUVs waited, headlights casting long shadows across the driveway. One of the men opened the door. I paused for just a second, not to reconsider, but to remember. I looked up at our bedroom window, where once I had dreamed of peace, of home, of building a life that didn't require lies or silence. But some of us aren't meant to live quietly. Some of us are built to walk into fire. The agent asked me, "Any regrets?" I glanced at my wrist where the sleeve had risen, revealing the top of the Phoenix tattoo, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't feel the need to hide it. "No," I said, "but she might." I didn't leave her with a goodbye, not out loud anyway, because words spoken in haste dissolve too quickly in the air. They blur, bend, get rewritten by memory, and I needed something she couldn't ignore, couldn't laugh off or file away. Under trauma I don't understand. So before I walked out that door for the last time, I slipped a letter under her pillow, just 4 pages folded down the center, handwritten in the same block script I used to jot coordinates on ammo crates, every word etched with more weight than any conversation we ever had. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't cruel. It was honest in a way I had never dared to be while I was still trying to be the version of myself she could live with. I wrote about the first man I killed, a kid, barely 20, high on adrenaline and orders, who looked at me like I was death. Before he even knew what hit him. I wrote about the brothers I carried back from missions in zipped-up bags, their boots still tied, their dog tags still warm from their necks. I wrote about the heat, the noise, the blood, the silence that followed. The way the world felt quieter after each operation, not peaceful. Just emptier. I told her about the day I got the tattoo after Winter Path, when Command called me into a tent and said the media would report it as an accident, a weather event, and that none of us would speak of it again, not because we weren't proud, but because the truth wasn't digestible. And I agreed. I let them bury it. I let them bury me. I wrote that I wasn't broken when I came home. I was restrained, worn, cracked maybe, but not shattered. I wrote that the limp came from a mission that saved lives, that the nightmares weren't memories. I didn't relive things. I recalculated them, wondering if I'd made the right call. I told her I learned early that pain, when spoken, doesn't disappear, it just gets misinterpreted. So I kept quiet, and in that quiet, she made assumptions. Safe, that word again. She told people I was safe. What she meant was that I was passive, pliable, predictable. What she didn't realize was that silence is its own kind of armor, and eventually armor turns into a wall. I told her I remembered the night she first called me her gentle soldier. I let her. I smiled. But inside, I was screaming because I wasn't gentle, I was exhausted. There's a difference. I told her I built birdhouses because I couldn't sleep. I worked at the hardware store because it was the only place where the shelves didn't move and the orders didn't come with casualties. I told her I never removed my shirt in daylight because the tattoo wasn't for show, it was for warning. Not to scare others, to remind myself. I told her I loved her. I loved her kindness, her warmth, the way she made coffee with too much cinnamon and danced barefoot in the kitchen on Sunday mornings. I loved the life we tried to build, even if it was on ground too soft to support weight like mine. But I also told her that love, real love, doesn't hide from the dark. It doesn't shrink from the unspoken. It doesn't label silence as weakness. And it doesn't call someone broken just because their grief doesn't come in tears and stories. I told her she didn't fail me. She chose comfort, and that's not a crime. Most people do. But I was never built for comfort. I was built to carry things. Things people never want to see. Things they'd rather forget. Things they thank you for fixing, then flinch away from when you start to bleed. I told her I hope she finds peace, real peace, not the kind you manufacture by pretending the world is simpler than it is. I told her I hope one day, if someone hands her truth, she doesn't push it aside like clutter, that she opens it, reads it, lets it change her, because the world doesn't need more people who flinch at honesty. It needs people who stay, who listen, who ask. I ended the letter with the coordinates of the canyon where Winter Path ended. She'll never go, but part of me hopes she does. Because there's a plaque there, under a flat stone, hidden beneath sand and silence. No names, just numbers. The kind of place that forces you to ask questions. As I climbed into the SUV, bag slung over my shoulder, boots sinking into gravel. One of the men in the gray suit glanced at me. Any regrets? He asked, like they all do, as if the answer might change how the next mission goes. I looked out the window at the house I'd helped repaint, the garden I'd tilled, the porch swing I hung last summer because she said it made the place feel like home. I thought about the years I spent trying to be someone softer, and I thought about the letter, sitting under her pillow, a truth waiting to be read. I rolled up my sleeve, exposing the tattoo in the sunlight for the first time in years, and said quietly, "No, but she might."